So in this session, we're going to be hearing directly from some SFU students and instructors who've been using open educational resources and practices in their courses. And we're just going to be giving our speakers a chance to introduce themselves in a moment here. And each speaker's been given about 10 minutes to speak, and at the end we'll have some time for an open discussion. For today's session too, our panelists have been asked to think a little bit about questions around why and how they became interested in open education, what kinds of open education related projects or initiatives they've been working on or are planning to work on in future, and in some cases how they've integrated open resources into their courses, and how the use of open educational resources and practices impacts student learning and engagement. And so thinking about the student engagement piece, I'm going to just start us off here with Russell Dunsford from the Student Society for our first introduction.
Hey, am I just doing introduction, or do you want me to do the whole talk right now?
Take it away.
Okay. All right. So my name is Russell Dunsford, and I recently served a year on the board of directors at the Simon Fraser Student Society as the environment representative. It was through this role that I first came into contact with open access. And I wasn't really sure much about it at first. I hadn't heard much about it. I was kind of new to it. But it just seemed like something that was a really good idea, something that, saved costs for students, something that made learning a little bit more engaging. And so I just tried to get involved as soon as I could. I joined the OER working group, where I met Hope and all these wonderful people that you were introduced to earlier. And so I've not done a lot of work on the open pedagogy side and the actual classroom side of open access. I've more been involved in advocacy for open access. So I served a lot through this role, through my role in the advocacy committee. And one of the major things that I did for open access advocacy was the lobbying trip. So every year, the Simon Fraser Student Society does a provincial lobbying trip during the provincial government's lobbying week in the late fall. So we go with other post-secondary institutions, usually with the BC Federation of Students, which includes a bunch of different post-secondary institutions, including like Douglas College, Kwantlen, VIU, and many more. As well as the Alma Mater Society at UBC. And so we all go together, we all pool a lot of our research and a lot of our resources, and we meet with a bunch of ministers to talk about different issues concerning students and the student body at the time. Often one of these issues, or shouldn't call it an issue, but often one of these topics is open access and OERs. So this year, we had 3 students and a staff member that went. We did some of our own original research. We didn't just use the Federation of Students. And it was largely organized by the Advocacy Committee and our VP External, Jazz Deepgill, who did a wonderful job. And so there was a lot of different topics that we discussed. Some of the big ones were, sexual violence support and prevention funding, student loan interest, but of course also open educational resources and open access. So it was a topic that was brought up at multiple meetings. The meeting that I spoke about OER at was with the Critics for Advanced Education, so that was Stephanie Cadeau and Simon Gibson. And so it was about the 5th topic that came up at the meeting, and for the first topics, they were fairly chippy. They were not so sure about the asks we were making. They even questioned the research at certain points. So I was getting ready to plead my case, getting ready to build an argument, digging in my heels. And as soon as the topic came up, they were extremely receptive to it, and I was pleasantly surprised. I didn't really have to make an argument for it at all. In fact, they kind of did it themselves. And so I would attribute this and this awareness and this kind of acceptance of OER, even outside of the immediate academia field, largely to the success of advocacy efforts like the Textbook Broke campaign put together by BC Campus, and like Open Textbooks Now, which was a multi-year initiative by the BC Federation of Students. And I think it's really because of these advocacy efforts that we saw such receptiveness from the ministers during lobbying week. And so fast forward to April of this year, and at the Cascadia Open Education Summit, as I'm sure many of you have heard, Melanie Mark announced that there was going to be $3.26 million in funding and a one-time induction to BC campus. So as much as it wasn't the original ask of $5 million, it was a significant contribution to the organization, and we're very happy with the result. And of course, it would be insulting to suggest that there was the result of solely the lobbying trip. Again, I would attribute this result to the continued advocacy efforts of OER working groups, people like Hope here, doing amazing work on campus over the course of years and raising awareness about OERs. And to see it reach outside of academia at that level was just really, really motivational. And I was really proud to see it. Thank you.
So if questions come up about the dialectical map tool, the DMAP tool that I'm going to talk about, please do, please do get in touch with me, Joan Sharp, jsharp@sfu.ca, or John Nesbitt in education, or John Bourne knows about it too, because as I'll be describing, he's involved from the TLC end. So I think this initiative really exemplifies some really positive things about OER. It's collaborative. It involves cooperation between education, science, and Teaching and Learning Centre. It's the development of the software was with an agile method, which I was extremely impressed by, and it really makes a difference to students' engagement and learning, not only learning of argumentation, which is what this tool addresses, but also learning of subject material as well, which they really, as people say, you not only learn to argue, you argue to learn. And we've been able to demonstrate that students have very effectively done both. So it started in 2015, Kathleen Fitzpatrick, who's in the audience, and I walked over, we're both biological science teaching faculty. We walked over to education to see what people in education who'd also were involved in science education were doing. One of our colleagues had initiated that with Sean Bullock, so we went over to meet with Gary Negan and with John Nesbitt to hear what they were up to with their in-study program. And I learned about this dialectical map, which had been invented by Hui Nu, who was a graduate student, a doctoral student of John Nesbitt's. And in fact, she won the Education Gold Medal for her doctoral thesis on this dialectical map. Equally important, equally impressive as winning the gold medal for her doctoral thesis, her thesis was accepted without a single revision. I think that happens occasionally, but it's the first time I'd ever heard of it. So it really is a wonderful tool. And I started using it in my teaching right away in my in my introduction to biology courses, in my general biology courses, in my third year vertebrate biology courses, and used in somewhat different ways. And what this tool does, it's an online open educational resource, argument visualization tool that allows students to set up, you present a claim to the students, or in some cases the students come up with their own claim. They have to put forward pro reasons. These are arguments in support of the claim with evidence. The evidence can either be supporting or opposing the reasons that they put forward. And this is especially important, took me a while to realize this, warrants. Warrants explain how the evidence either supports or opposes the reasons, the pro and con reasons that they're presenting. So it's actually very simple and intuitive. So as I say, I've been using it in my teaching since 2015. Oh, and then the other thing is it's a dialectical map, so they have to put not only pro but also con reasons. So in fact, they have to argue for and against the claim with evidence and with warrants to explain how the evidence supports or opposes the claim. And it's interesting, just in this audience, Diana Kucherman is using this map this semester in her computer science course. It's been used in criminology. It's been used in education. It's been used in a number of courses in science. In fact, NAIYA used it last semester in an evolution course. And in my courses, which are vertebrate and introduction to biology and general biology course, the kinds of claims that the students argue against, for instance, in the first year course, they argued for and against the claim that wolves must be killed to protect endangered caribou in British Columbia. And this obviously is both a biological and a public policy issue. In Diana's course, the students will be arguing about whether smartphones are a benefit or a cost to the classroom. In vertebrate biology, the students argue whether the tetrapods arose from alpistostegid fishes that lived 375 million years ago, or from tetrapod ancestors that lived earlier than that. So you can come up with quite distinct and different types of claims, claims that clearly have sort of a public policy focus, or claims that are competing hypotheses on scholarly issues. So one really positive thing is that both John Nesbitt and his doctoral student, Hui Nu, and his current doctoral student, Ching Lu, all of them wanted to use this as an open educational resource. It's of great interest, especially at this time when evaluation of evidence and looking at key issues from both sides and really understanding what the competing arguments are, what the evidence is, how credible the evidence is, and then reaching a reasoned conclusion. That is the part of the map I forgot to mention, based on the arguments and evidence that you have presented within the map. This is a crucial topic, both in academia and for citizens. And one thing I have found in my classes, based on surveys and focus groups, is that the students feel that not only do they feel that they learn very effectively from completing a dialectical map, which can also be downloaded as an essay outline, and this is what Diana's going to be doing in her class, they also really value the fact that it is dialectical in nature. They have to argue both sides. They really value the fact that they actually learn to argue. I know one of my favorite comments, the student said, I thought I was good at arguing before, but I found out I wasn't. But now I do feel that I understand the basics of argumentation. In my teaching, I've tested them on material on which they developed their own dialectical map and compared it with other also controversial topics that I simply presented to them and presented both sides to them and gave them equally challenging questions on a final exam on both, and they do far better, significantly better, on the questions that involve their developing their own arguments and evidence and coming to a conclusion. We have worked with, so we've had sort of a dual stream of working with a map within education with a developer, a software developer we hired. TLC also is working, so we've got sort of two parallel streams. We're actually going to be using them both this semester, one in my course, the TLC in my course, and the other in Diana's course, and doing some head-to-head comparisons from the students. But the intention is to bring this tool to TLC to be broadly available to people at the university, and to be broadly available beyond the university eventually, hopefully, if BC Campus is willing to support that. It will be an open educational resource. It's very simple software that can be used, and we're hoping through TLC to set up some ongoing support for it. I'll just briefly mention the Agile method that we used in working with our software developer. The people that were involved in this project, so John Nesbitt, Ching Lu, John Boom, Christina Drabik's involved now, and myself, and now Diana's joining. So the people that are involved in using the resource, as we were developing, the people who were involved in that time met twice a week initially, and then once a week with the software developer. And it was amazing because we had, the DMAP had existed as a research tool in NStudy, but as we were broadening its use and developing it for use within Canvas, it was amazing how many questions came up about things that didn't quite work the way we wanted, or we realize now from student feedback what we needed. So this Agile method, apparently with Agile method, you work with the developer all the time. You're in constant contact. So Kenny Tang, our developer, said this isn't really Agile, but we met twice a week for an hour each time, and each time he would show us what the tool was looking like. We would then give feedback, and then he would modify it as we went along. And it was an incredibly successful way of developing a tool. We ended up with a tool that really works the way we want, and we're very happy with it. NAIYA will appreciate one of the really frustrating things was that it lacked a submission acknowledgement. I think that drove the students crazy. So we are correcting that now. Okay. So we did get feedback from students about fairly minor problems that we had, and we are continuing to improve things. But this is a tool that will be, it's already available in restricted form in Canvas, but it will become broadly available in Canvas once we combine the two development streams that we've got. So keep an eye out, and do get in touch with either me or with John Nesbitt or John Boom if you want to be, and we will certainly be advertising its availability within the university and then beyond for people who want to encourage and train students to argue in their classrooms.
Thank you so much.
So hi everyone, my name is Ella Pshabiwo. I'm Ruth Wynn Woodward Chair in Gender, Sexuality and Women's Studies at SFU Burnaby campus. NAIYA and I are going to talk about a class that I designed and that NAIYA partook in, and kind of talk about some of the strategies we used. I'll talk for the first 4 minutes, and then NAIYA will talk for the second 4 minutes. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm NAIYA. I'm a gender studies major, biological sciences minor, and yeah, I took Bella's class.
Great. So the class that I offered was called Intersectional Feminist Journal Praxis. It used the perspectives of intersectional feminisms, also queer and anti-racist and decolonial digital humanities. And here are some sources on here if you're interested in kind of the nitty-gritty of who you read in the class, and critical thinking on publishing as well. The class was offered in fall 2018, and we had 8 students. And basically, we worked together in kind of a collaborative way to build an online feminist journal. So the system that we used for that was Open Journal System Software, OJS, so the students learned how to navigate that along with me. I also had lots of learning with the support actually of Kate Shuttleworth and also Kevin Stranak. A few of the course goals were thinking about praxis, so a key part I imagine of like critical pedagogy, and all the more so of critical feminist pedagogy, is thinking not only about students as learning and absorbing things, but also thinking about students as creating knowledge and building on knowledge and relating to theory in kind of various ways. So that was a key part of the class, is building collaboration and building praxis. So instead of just reading this intersectional theory, thinking about how it actually plays out in the world. I also wanted them to gain a critical suspicion of institutions, so a key feminist project here, and also of publishing in itself. I wanted them to work together, to form feminist friendships, and to focus on kind of what they could do together if they really wanted to create something in the world. So here we have a still of the journal, which the students named Intersectional Apocalypse. And there's, you can just Google that and it'll come up, which I think speaks to how powerful the title of the journal is that you chose. But also here's a URL if you're interested in looking at that. And just some final things. So the context for the class, in addition to kind of this context of intersectional and anti-racist feminist work, really also was rooted in thinking about how publishing can be used differently, both as a pedagogical tool, instead of just teaching students to publish, teaching students how publishing can be used in transformative ways. So we were drawing on critiques, for example, such as an article published by Lariviere, Hostein, and Mongion that talked about how really a lot of publishing is in the hands of commercial publishers, and really, even as the costs for publishing decrease, the costs for us and for libraries increase. So it's becoming this big industry, similar to, actually on their profit margins, to car manufacturers and pharmaceuticals, even though it's connected to things like knowledge. So we really wanted to question that. We also wanted to think about the work involved in journal editing and in publishing, publishing, and kind of challenging this idea of it being hope labor and something you have to do towards tenure or getting a job, and really studying what it actually involves to be involved in publishing at all stages. We also looked a lot at open access and sort of this promise of open access. So, for example, we drew on the kitchen table press and the women in print movement from the 70s, where they talked about the freedom of the press belongs to those who own the press. So we saw open access on the one hand as an extension of that, but on the other hand as also coming with like certain risks. Like, for example, Kimberly Kristen talks about how open access isn't open access for everyone. It also is open access. It also can involve the thieving of knowledge from various communities, such as Indigenous communities, and making it accessible to all in kind of a colonial and settler colonial tradition. So we wanted to promote open access, but also do so critically.
Okay, so yeah, again, I'm NAIYA. That's my major and my minor. So for me, this was a very different course than I was used to. I think I've been in university for 5 years now. It's taking a while. And throughout most of the courses that I've been in, I'm accustomed to the top-down teaching method where, as probably most of us know, the instructor holds all the knowledge. You kind of just listen. You get your assignments, you do it on your own, and then you give them the final thing and you get a grade. And as well, that kind of environment has a very competitive learning sort of feel. So you aren't really collaborating truly, even if you are working in group projects, you are still, it feels like you're trying to one-up one another. And I've been very accustomed to disciplinary rifts. So I'm studying in two very different subject areas. It's been very difficult to kind of reconcile the philosophies of the two. So this course kind of challenged all of that, especially by looking at praxis in particular. You're looking at theory and then what you can actually do with that, and not just in like, I'm going to tell this person this sort of idea that I read in this text. It's like we're trying to actually publish something, which was really cool. And before this course, I didn't know anything about open access or there being a lack of access to publications. I'd just assumed, like, I use my library ID to log in. That doesn't mean anything. I didn't know that you would have to pay a lot of money to read a lot of these journals. So that's kind of what I learned. So in this class, we had 5 different groups. We had a call for papers group, which told people what our theme was, which was digital dialogues, navigating online spaces. We had a call for papers looking for submissions in, I think, 6 different languages, although we only received submissions in English and a little in Spanish. We had a collaborative peer review process, which was a little different than the regular double-blind system, in which contributors were actually asked whether they wanted to peer review as well. And in that way, it kind of created a community in which the work of the issue kind of became this collaborative sort of thing, and it wasn't just individual contributors doing their own thing and some other peer reviewers. We also, using OJS, had a system for peer review in which you could actually, you write your peer review, the person who gets the review can respond and be like, what do you mean by that? The reviewer can talk back to them. It becomes a conversation rather than just one submission and then a revision, and maybe more of that. We had a group of 1 person who copy edited all the pieces with Ella. Ella designed the graphics, because we only had 8 people in the class. And then my group, which included myself and 2 other students, wrote the introduction, which was 17 pages, had poetry, zines that we created as a class, as well as artwork from a local or Toronto-based artist, Queenie Wong. And so together as a class, we wrote the journal manifesto. We determined the licensing model. We had options for traditional knowledge licensing that individual contributors could have done. We very quickly learned HTML and CSS to upload the pieces in about 2 days. And we read out and recorded each piece to create MP3 versions in case people didn't want to read it or weren't able to read it, they would be able to listen. And throughout the course, we were able to form alternative modes of relationality between peers, teachers, and collaborators, I think, through the format of the course. So what we learned is that how you use open access technologies in OER are just as important as having access to them in the first place. A lot of what we read was like, who is this access for? Who can use the technology to publish? Who can receive the content? And through creating the journal, which is essentially just an exercise, not a perfect publication in any way, we were able to really realize there are barriers to putting this knowledge out. It's not the most accessible platform. You have to learn a bit of coding, which we didn't know until the end. Who can receive the content? If you only put it in HTML format, are people going to be able to access that if they have slow internet? So we did PDFs as well. We did audio for people who weren't able to read. And the course itself was 3 months. So because of that, there were time restraints. We didn't really have any money to pay contributors, so we did some fundraising. And to try to go against the expectation that this sort of work should be free labor for publishers, peer reviewers, and authors. And throughout the course, we tried to implement strategies, especially the priorities matrix tool, which was really all of us sitting in a circle determining point by point exactly what we needed and being able to have a say in every decision we made. We wrote logbooks, we had speakers, field trips, workshops in order to gain outside perspectives. And we really wanted to work on situating ourselves and our actions in the larger frameworks and histories that we exist within. So yeah, that was the cake we had in our launch party. And thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Anointing Momo. I'm a recent graduate of the Masters of Public Policy at SFU. Feels good to say that I'm a graduate, yeah. I'm an international student from Nigeria, and I'm here at SFU as a recipient of the African Leaders of Tomorrow Scholarship. And I'm saying this because it frames how I approach the open access movement and how it has framed my experience with it. I would like to thank the Open Access Open Education Resource Working Group for inviting me to speak about my experience. I don't have so much experience with open access, but I'm an expert on my experience with the movement, and so I think I can share some thoughts on that. Okay, now how I think about open access, what has been my experience with it. I'm coming from a time or a country where I've always been interested in open access. And when I say I've always been interested in open access, this is what I mean. Through most of my education, I've had to share materials using flash drives, using using flash drives, share publications with students, with colleagues, with lecturers using flash drives. And so coming to SFU, being able to access so many journals from my student account, for me that was revolutionary. And coming in contact with a movement that talks about having access to a lot more materials without having to pay for it, that's on another level. And so for me, my experience with open access, with the idea of open access, it's something that for me, it's very revolutionary. Here at SFU, my experience with open access, so during the last year, throughout 2018, I was the Director of Graduate Services for the Graduate Student Society. And that was really my first experience with the movement here at SFU. And in my role, I had to coordinate the GSS Open Access Award. So it's a bursary for graduate students that have published in open access journals. It's a small amount, but for graduate students, it meant a lot. And so that was my first experience with open access, and getting feedbacks from graduate students how the the challenges they face in being able to publish in journals, in trustworthy journals. It got me thinking a lot about the issues around democratization of knowledge, and seeing how important it is for graduate students to publish in journals and not being able to publish because of the various barriers that they face. And so I think it's very important to pursue open access issues, especially from the perspectives of students, considering the fact that considering how much education and access to education helps in mobility. Now, referring back to my experience coming from a developing country, coming from Nigeria, students get to do a lot of work. They are interested in learning, but not being able to access the required materials could be very demotivating. And so for me, it's something that needs to be pushed more. So I was asked to speak about what my experience has been and what initiatives I intend pursuing further after now on open access. Now, like I said, I'm from Nigeria, and after now I intend to go back to Nigeria. And thinking about these issues and relating back to my context as a student that went through the Nigerian educational system, I think open access for most students in Nigeria, in developing countries, it goes further back in the sense that we have to start thinking about access to open access, because for most students, they don't even know that there's something called open access. And so those have been my thoughts around open access. Issues around access to the internet, first place. So if you're talking about open access, who is able to access these resources? Now, the speakers that talked before me talked about making these resources available to people that might not have fast internet access. Now, this is the experience for a lot of students in African countries. And I was able to share some thoughts around this with fellow African students during OpenCon in November 2018. And so, talking about access to open access, being able to access the internet, being able to know about the resources that are out there, for me, and so those are some of the initiatives I intend pursuing after now when I get back to my country, Nigeria. And so getting people to know, getting students in several African countries in Nigeria to know that there are a lot of resources available for them to pursue education at little or no cost. Now, there might be some cost involved in getting internet access and all that, but knowing that there is something called open access is something that that has been very revolutionary for me, and yes, so that has been my experience with open access. And speaking also about my experience with open access. Now, I recently graduated from the Master's of Public Policy, and thinking about how expensive it is to get textbooks. I've been privileged not to have to be on a scholarship, and so most of my tuition was paid for. But then thinking about the fact that for most students, getting textbooks, getting textbooks is having to balance between paying for tuition on the one hand and paying for textbooks on the other hand. I think it speaks to the heart of what society is about, what the society intends for the future, what the society is looking out to bring out for the future generation. And so I think it's faculty and students should be very much more interested in pursuing these movements. And I think it's having conversations around how to get students to know about open access, getting more of these materials out to students, getting them to know about it. I think it's something that's very important, and it's really the way forward for education on so many fronts. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much to our speakers there for introducing themselves and telling us a little bit about their work with open educational resources and practices on campus. So certainly it's great to hear about everything from tools that are being developed in the classroom for instructors to engage students that they can share with instructors in other departments to use with their classes as well. Hearing a little bit about the importance to students about advocating for open textbooks and other free open resources that can save students money and remove barriers to access. Things that the Student Society is doing and the Graduate Student Society to develop awards to recognize graduate students publishing openly. And also to hear about projects in the classroom as well to engage students and to facilitate opportunities to make that contribution to public knowledge through coursework as well. So I think what we'll do now is we do have a little bit of time for questions. One of our speakers, Dr. Maddie Knickerbocker, is unfortunately away today due to illness. So she was going to speak today a little bit about some of the work that she's done. And just to give you a little bit of a preview, Maddie has been working with a group of local historians to develop an open BC history textbook. And one thing that she's been involved with recently too, this is from her Twitter here, is a Wikipedia course assignment. So with this assignment, this was a history course, North American Indigenous history prior to 1850. And students in this course were encouraged to work through an assignment that where they were either editing or in some cases, in 3 cases, actually publishing totally new articles on Wikipedia on different topics related to Indigenous history prior to 1850. So she had, through this assignment, 3 students publishing new articles, and I believe over 31 new entries that were added where content was developed there. So again, giving students really an opportunity to really concretely contribute to public knowledge in that way. So I know that Maddie was very disappointed not to be here today, but we do hope to hear from her again in future. So I think what I'll do is I have a few questions for our panelists, but maybe I'll just see if there are questions in the room here. Does anybody have a question for any of our speakers?
I have 2 questions. The first was for NAIYA. I was curious, you mentioned that as a class you had to determine which Creative Commons license you were going to use, and you also used a TK license. I was just wondering, what was the process for actually determining the Creative Commons license, and how did you learn about it? How did you learn about Creative Commons licensing?
Okay, sorry, my memory's a little fuzzy, but we did some readings on it. We looked at a few websites that kind of gave descriptions of what the different licensings were, and then I think we each sort of said which license we would have liked to do and discussed which one, and then we chose. Yeah.
Yeah, we looked at the Creative Commons licensing page. One of the students was in charge of kind of directing us to think about licensing. So they took care of that, and we considered all the licensing, and we thought about what it offered. Yeah, we read a few pieces, and we used the decision matrix tool, which NAIYA mentioned earlier, to kind of we compared each option with each other option, and that led us to what we selected.
My second question is for Anointing and Russell. Kind of a collaborative question. Is one of the things that you said that I thought was really poignant is that you said we need to start thinking about access to open access. And you were talking about sort of about the ways in which to have these conversations and advocate for students. And I was wondering what do you think are the best ways to have these conversations and get the word out, particularly with students, about open access and open education? So either one.
Okay, yeah. So I think opportunities like the Open Access Awards that the GSS was coordinating was one way to get the word out to open access, about open access. For me, it was my first engagement with the movement, knowing that there was actually a movement around getting materials, making materials available to students, and the work that the Open Access, the Open Education Resource Working Group is doing. I think that's another step in the right direction. And there are several communities among students that are trying to push the word out to get students to know that these materials are available, that there's a lot out there. But then I think there's also the concern about, and I was amazed to know how much material is out there, and so it could become overwhelming for students at some point. So I think it all boils down to having interactions like this and getting the word out it's about also getting the word out to faculty, getting them on board as well. Now, I was really taken by the presentation by Professor Wan about how he's integrating that into his class. Now, if you're able to get faculty on board, that goes a long way, because to a large extent, most of the educational system is still a lot reliant on faculty, and so if you have faculty that are advocates for open access, it goes a long way to push it, because there's like I say there's a, I don't think distrust is the right word, but there's a limit to which you would want to trust the word of a student about the quality of a material that you're going to access that's open access. And so if there's a word coming from faculty, there's a word coming from those that are experienced in a particular field about the quality of the materials that are out there, it goes a long way. And also a common perception around open access, especially for open access journals, there's a thinking that open access journals are the same thing as predatory journals. And so I was sharing a conversation some time ago with a colleague that had the experience of a faculty actually advising him against publishing in an open access journal because they think they are low quality journals. But then if you have faculty that are advocates for open access, it goes a long way to get students on board. Because if your students are a lot grade oriented, and so if there's some endorsement from faculty, I think it goes a long way, in addition to the various advocacy efforts that student groups, the open access the Open Educational Resource Working Group, and small groups like that are doing. Yeah.
Yeah, just to build on that, actually, I really do agree it's extremely important to get faculty engaged. And to go a step further, I think it's important to get all different stakeholders at different levels in campus engaged. So to go beyond just faculty and students, and if you could say engage admin, you might be able to open up new doors and new possibilities to expanding open access initiatives that you weren't aware of with the stakeholders you had engaged. So it really is about kind of expanding that influence around campus to encompass as many people as possible. It's an interesting challenge facing with undergrads. It's difficult to get undergraduates to engage in these sorts of topics. So you have to look for more creative ways to do it. Often it's about getting them to see the benefit, the direct benefit to themselves, because obviously there's lots of direct benefits from open access, but not all of them, people can't see how all of them immediately relate to their own life and their own experience and the people they know. So it's, I think, a matter of kind of spreading this awareness, and like Anointing said, not just within the student body, but within the university and within all stakeholders.
Great, thank you. What other questions do we have in the room for our panel here?
Oh, I don't think I need the mic. Just to build on what you were saying just now, how tough is it, do you think, to get people to philosophically align with the open access movement? I mean, all of you panelists, do you find that there's barriers, or do you find that it's easy to get people on board? Do you find that they intuitively understand the benefits, or, like how widespread is the understanding, and are people reticent against sharing their knowledge publicly?
Does anyone want to start? I can. Okay. Yeah, so good question. And I think one thing, or one aspect to it, is the difference between knowledge and engagement. So I think that you have a lot of students who vaguely know about open access. They've heard about it. They understand that it lowers costs of education. But getting them to really, look into the idea and find out, how open access initiatives on campus come about, how you implement OERs in classes, getting them to advocate for it and really engage with the topic and be involved is the hard part. Because it is a lot of time and a lot of effort out of people's lives to put, their own time into this. And getting them to understand that putting that time in isn't just, it's not just wasting time. And getting them to understand that, they're generating value for themselves and other people by investing that time is, I think, kind of where you run into some challenges in helping people understand that idea.
Should we just go down? Is that okay for everyone? I would say it depends for which community we're talking about. I would agree with what you were saying, definitely, that there is still this hierarchy between, like many of the, if we think of ranking systems for journals, many of the high-ranking journals are not open access journals, or you have to buy into open access, which itself is like a really fraught thing. But I can think of so many wonderful feminist journals that have arisen in the last 5 years. For example, Decolonization, Wagadu, which was one of the first kind of feminist open access journals, Feral Feminisms, which I'm involved in, Catalyst, which is a journal of new technology and feminism and science, ADA, Journal of Gender, New Media and Society. These are just like a few examples that come to mind. So I think there is, I think if we think of, for feminism especially, there is something transformative in being able to share your knowledge with others. And I think that's ultimately the goal of many forms of feminism, is to open conversations, to speak to the communities we're part of rather than just about them. So I think in that community in particular, it's been very powerful, yeah.
I guess just for me, when I first heard about open access, I definitely didn't have any oh, that's bad that I would get access to this. And I think that a lot of other students who really truly encounter learning open access resources when they're actually working with them are not going to have an issue with them. But that's what I know. There might be other people who don't like it. I'm not sure.
Okay, on how tough it is, I think the experience of Professor Wan says a lot about how tough it is. He shared about how it directly impacted his remuneration in some way, and so I think it's tough because open access is coming against an age-long system, the traditional educational system like we know it. Now, there are a lot of risks involved. Now, some of these methods have not been tested. Some of these resources have not been tested, and so there's a risk there, and there's also a lot of inertia that tends to push back on it. So also to build up on the comment that was made by, sorry, I can't pronounce, by Ella, yeah. That also speaks to different hierarchies, so different stakeholders within the open access movement. The how tough it is to get through to each of these hierarchies, it's different. Now, so for example, thinking about a professor that has so many years of experience working within the traditional educational system with the textbooks, the paid textbooks. You've used these textbooks over the years, you trust them and all that. It might be more difficult compared with getting someone like Professor Wan on board with relatively fewer years, and someone that's working within that space. So he has a lot of experience with open access, how it works, and he understands the different aspects to it. And so I think it speaks to the different stakeholders, the different groups of people that the movement has to break through. And so I think but overall it's coming against something that has been long established. And so with everything we're doing, there's always going to be that pushback. Yeah, and so.
Thank you. Perhaps a related question here, but just thinking, thinking a little bit about open pedagogy and the talk this morning, thinking about certainly some of the benefits of, engaging students with engaging publicly, contributing to conversations happening beyond the academy through open assignment work and publishing their work openly. What do you think might, though, be some of the risks? We heard a little bit this morning about some of the risks, some of the tensions involved in kind of working in the open when it comes to the classroom. Just wondering if anyone might want to speak to that a little bit.
Okay, I think it builds up on some of the comments we made earlier. Now, for the risks for a student, so thinking about publishing in the journal, now you need your whatever. So you have several. If it's a PhD student, you have several years, several months of research trying to, and your goal would be to publish in a high-ranking journal. And like another of the speaker pointed out, these journals are not open access, and so now wanting to go out on a limb to promote open access and trying to publish in these journals could be a very significant risk. It affects when you graduate and all that. So I think, speaking for a student, for a graduate student, I think the risks could be enormous. Yeah, especially without that support from faculty, without that support from those that have a lot of experience within that space. Yeah, I think the risk could be a lot for students.
Thank you.
I guess the risks that I thought of were, especially with our journal in particular, publishing in the feminist arena is not exactly like super widely accepted. There are just, there's movements online that are very anti-feminist that target people who work in those areas, and so I guess that's a risk of open access, that you can be found by anyone, your work can be taken out of context, and you have your name on it. So I guess maybe luckily ours was very small. Oh yeah, we also had anonymous options, so I think that was something that we used to kind of buffer, because some people were talking about pretty sensitive subject areas, personal subject areas, so we didn't want to make people have to lay their lives out in the open like that.
Yeah, I would say that another risk potentially, and I want to just emphasize that I think getting students to practice open access through doing it themselves, like working on a journal, is great, because it empowers them as knowledge makers, which often students are, and students are often encouraged us to give us what we want, or to only have a reader of one who's the instructor. So this changes things in the sense that it makes their work count more in the world, which I think is really empowering. But in terms of risks, that it can also be this weird way in which we can expect students to do free labor, like the labor of creating knowledge on Wikipedia, say, or the labor of working on a journal. This is usually unpaid work, and it can add to a student's load and a student's stress, and I definitely saw that in my class as well.
Not exactly a risk, but more of a concern, similar to what Anointing was talking about with publishing between open access and non-open access journals, is that students are almost incentivized to not publish open access because there's more profit in not publishing open access, especially if you can make it into some of the leading journals that aren't open access. So it's a tough barrier to get over when it's almost like the system encourages students to not publish open access.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, looks like we have a question.
So I have a question about one of the concerns that it's about the potential perception of a difference in quality between open system material and paid material. So I don't know if you would agree with that. If there's any reality behind any, differences in quality, and perhaps specifically with BC campus material and maybe paid textbooks, for example, which are, maybe they're undergoing more reviews. There's a whole process it is, to publish in comparison to open source textbooks, for example, which may or may not have gotten the same review process. So would you agree that there is a perception that there is quite a bit of a difference in quality between open source material and big material, and if there is that perception, how can we handle that?
I can start if you want. Okay, sure. Yeah, so I would agree that there definitely is a perception like that. It seems people are less eager to get their information from open source journals. Closed journals are often more highly respected. Almost, it seems as a result of the fact that that there's a cost associated with them. As far as how to change that, it's a long and difficult process. I think it's almost somewhat of a stigma that comes along with open access, is that because it's open and because it's able to be edited or republished openly, people immediately run with that concern, and there's some fairness to that. Although I don't believe that there is actually a significant quality difference generally between open access and closed journals. But there is certainly that perception, and it is one of the things that we need to pay attention to in advocating for open access.
Do we have time? I would say, I guess I would encourage myself and all other people to teach to just be really creative with how they do so. There's always ways, like if there is actually an issue of quality, I'm not so sure with textbooks, but I wouldn't say that's the case with journals. I think there's so many excellent open access journals out there that and the same scholars publish in the open access as in the non-open access. So I don't think it's really the quality thing. Pertains across the board in any way. But just being creative with syllabi, like there's always ways to hack textbooks. You can still make textbooks open access in various ways. There's funds to do that. You can make them available legally, which many people do for students who don't have money to actually, afford textbooks. So and also having like a syllabus that is dynamic, that doesn't only revolve around one text or one form of information, that draws on the various many ways in which knowledge is made, and also empowers students to make knowledge in many ways. Because the reality is that a lot of academics are working on many fronts, publishing online, publishing in open access, doing books, doing journals. It's like, a multimodal kind of world out there. So, having a syllabus that reflects that, I think, makes sense.
Okay, yeah. So I think there's that perception that there's a difference in quality. How true that perception is, it's a different question. Getting quality material out there, it's a lot of work for academics, for people writing textbooks. It's a lot of work, and so I think that speaks to the models or the funding models for education. How do we fund education? How are faculty remunerated? Are they? So I'm not an expert on the educational system, how faculty is remunerated, but then what proportion of their remuneration goes towards the amount of time they spend producing open access resources? Are they compensated for that? I think those things factor into the amount of work, the quality of work that goes into some of these textbooks. And so I think I know those conversations are being had about the funding models for education to be able to get more quality materials to be open access. But then, yes, I would say, yes, there's that perception of difference in quality. And to the extent that perception is justified, I think it's an open question. Yeah, but definitely there are very quality open access resources. I've had access to a number of them. Yeah.
Thank you. And just if I can jump in here too, if the question is around open educational resources like open textbooks, for example, I think there certainly is a perception, but I think in reality there's a case that publishing open can really, in a sense, strengthen quality because commercial our commercial textbooks, if there's an error in a textbook, it can take a while until the next edition comes out and those things are corrected. Open textbooks are, they're very easy to edit. So, if an author is notified about an error, they can quickly correct that. If they get feedback about content that would be useful to add, that can be easily added. Because these resources are published openly and with permission to adapt them, instructors also have the option of customizing the material for their own courses and for adding their own perspectives and voice to the material for their students as well. And with certainly with collections like the robust collections like the BC Campus Open Textbook Collection, those ones do go through open peer review. In fact, I believe there are incentives for faculty to review an open textbook, and So these are openly available to be reviewed. That feedback can be easily incorporated without waiting for kind of a second edition to be published. It can be immediately updated as well. So there's a case on that side as well. Yeah.
I have a question for Ella and for NAIYA about the fundraising that you did for the project. My question is about what did you do with the funds? I'm assuming that you were paying the artist who was contributing artwork, but did you also pay the students for their work in putting this journal together?
So the fundraising we did was very small, and we did pay the artist. We kind of split up the amount that we had between the artist and the 8 contributors, and so they each got paid the same amount. I think it was 8 contributors, something like that. So yeah, it was just contributors and the artist who were paid. Like $50 per contributor. Yeah.
Yeah, we had discussions in the class around what students wanted to do with the funds. And we did talk about paying students, but I think there wasn't enough money for it. So it was a lot of I wanted it to be student-driven, the whole process. So I wasn't gonna, I did a bit of fundraising, but it was up to the students to decide what funding model they used, who they contacted, how much energy they had to do that. Like every phase of the journal was basically up to the students with my guidance. So when we raised that amount of money, we had to make decisions, and students decided that it was a priority to pay contributors. A few students were contributors in the journal, so they got us, and we called them honorariums, because of course that money does not reflect the amount of work that goes into writing a piece. But it was more, I think, about the process and the conversations around that.
Thank you. I think we have time for maybe one more question. I see lunches here, but does anyone have one final question for our panelists here? All right, or if not, any final words to folks in the room here?
Just back to the quality thing, I've still been thinking about that question. I just wanted to say quickly as well that how we measure quality, of course, is indicative in itself. Until not so recently, women couldn't publish, or within feminist work of color wasn't published. There's all these ways in which quality is very much about kind of just doing the same old thing, business as usual, and deciding in advance what is actually worth publishing. Like the freedom of the press belongs to the press, that kind of thing. So I guess the bigger project is like everyone was saying on the panel, just kind of questioning those investments and what type of knowledge matters and how education becomes ossified in particular ways, sometimes very expensive ways that really don't work great for students.
Yeah, and I'd like to say each and every one of us in this room is contributing in our own little way to pushing the movement forward, to pushing open access, and whatever little work we do, whatever little idea we share with others, it goes a long way. So I can easily think of how my encounter or my experience with open access here at SFU would be propagated when I get back to Nigeria and all that. And it's due to the several other people that might not be in this room, people in this room that have been pushing for it, trying to do some little work, contributing by coming to discussions like this, clarifying ideas around open access, what it actually means, trying to come up with innovative models for funding open access, investing their time to develop materials, being innovative in how they deliver lectures, and students that are being interested in these things and looking out for other students in these several ways. And so, yeah, I think we all play a part in getting the word out and making sure people have access to open access in whatever way. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that I'm really happy to see so many people out at this event today. I know it's a lot of time to take, especially out of a weekday, so I really appreciate that. And, you know, one of the main things that I'm trying to do with open access is get as many people involved as possible. And so everyone here to take this amount of time must have some degree of involvement or care for open access. And I'm really happy to see that. So just thank you all for coming.
Thank you. That's the perfect note to end on here. Thank you so much.